We're the War Council from Silverhand, and this is a step-by-step guide on how to kill Nefarian, the end boss of Blackwing Descent, on 10-man. Nefarian is more difficult on 10-man than on 25, so bring your A-games. This is a 2-tank, 3-healer fight, and you'll need to make sure that your raid comp has at least 3 reliable interrupters. So, to begin the encounter, you simply drop down into the fighting area below. Be sure to land on the pillar as to negate some of the falling damage. Now, as soon as you engage Onyxia, have your tank drag her to the east to the edge of the platform and position her parallel to the edge. The reason for this is that Onyxia, like most dragons, performs a tail lash in addition to a nasty breath attack, and you'll want to keep the tail away from the rest of the raid as much as possible. The range and the arc on the tail lash is huge, so don't be careless with your positioning. About 15 seconds into the encounter, skeleton adds will begin spawning around the room, 6 in all. They start out moving slowly and spawn at a staggered rate, so one of your DPS classes should be able to pick up the adds and begin kiting them. We use the Death Knight for this, although there are several viable classes. Now, while these adds are being handled, Nefarian is going to land in the center of the platform. If he is not separated from Onyxia, the two dragons will buff each other and deal incredible damage, so have your second tank pull Nefarian to the opposite side of the fighting area. And this is phase 1. You'll have to handle Onyxia, Nefarian, and the skeletons. The skeletons will become faster and deal progressively more damage over the course of 1 minute before despawning. Most forms of crowd control work on them, and since they deal a lot of damage right before they despawn, we have a mage, a death knight, and a druid stack various crowd controls on the pack to keep them from killing anyone. You want the skeletons to despawn close together if possible. Once you've finished with the skeletons, you will not have to deal with them again until phase 3. Go back to killing the dragons. Each dragon has one special ability. Onyxia will occasionally charge up with electricity and zap anyone not in front of or behind her. The Onyxia tank must realize when this is occurring and turn her tail toward the raid to prevent them from taking electricity damage. Even if this coincides with the tail lash, turn her anyway. Never let Onyxia electrocute the raid. This first phase ends when Onyxia is killed. As you can see, we take her down to about 10% health before we focus on Nefarian. Nefarian's special ability is called Crackle, and every time his health reaches a 10% interval, such as 90%, he blasts the entire raid for about 100,000 damage each. Everyone needs to be topped off before this ability, and tanks should cycle through their cooldowns to minimize burst damage. The burst from Crackle and the breath can easily kill a tank without defensive cooldowns. Tanks should acquire a mirror of broken images for this fight and use it to mitigate as many crackles as possible. Now, some other videos might have you thinking this fight is a DPS check or soften rage at the end, but they are incorrect. Your goal in phase 1 is simply to push Nefarian through 2 crackles and then finish off Onyxia. Onyxia has an enrage bar of her own, so be sure to kill her before it fills completely and she wipes the raid. Once Onyxia is dead, Nefarian flies away and the second phase begins. Your raid will be split into 3 groups, one for each of the elevated platforms, and each platform requires 1 interrupter and 1 healer. Now, as you can see, the lava rises up from below and covers the lower platform. Everyone needs to be in position, ready to swim up and out of the lava and onto their platforms as soon as possible. Each platform has an add that needs to be continuously interrupted and killed. If the add gets one of its casts off, it will channel an ability that damages the entire raid. You only have a couple seconds to swim up and interrupt the first spell, so ranged interrupts or arcane torrents can be helpful here. Throughout this phase, Nefarian will also barrage the raid with fireballs. He shoots approximately the same number of fireballs on 10-man as he does on 25, making this phase extremely healing intensive and probably the hardest part of the 10-man encounter. Your ideal setup for this phase is to have 2 platforms with 2 DPS and 1 healer each, and the third platform with 1 DPS, both tanks, and your strongest healer. This provides the best split of damage amongst the platforms. If your raid lacks sufficient interrupters, you can split up the tanks. However, this means one platform will have less damage output, lengthening this healing intensive phase. When your platform's ad is dead, your ranged DPS can damage Nefarian while he hovers in the air. However, it is not recommended to push him below a 10% threshold in this phase, as the fireball barrages plus the crackle damage can easily give a couple of your players. The War Council recommends stopping your Nefarian damage at 72%. And yes, we know some strategy videos recommend pushing him through crackles in phase 2, but they are wrong. In the 10-man encounter, it is a foolish and unnecessary risk unless you know exactly what you are doing. So, when all 3 platform ads are dead, the third and final phase of the encounter finally begins. Nefarian lands and has the same abilities as in phase 1, Breath, Tail Lash, and Crackle. He is tanked in the middle of the room. Nefarian also throws fireballs at the skeleton ads, and these fireballs land and fan out, slowly covering portions of the room in fire. When the skeleton ads are touched by this fire, or by Nefarian's breath, they will respawn and once again begin their 60-second countdown to despawning. And just like in phase 1, they will slowly increase in power and in movement speed. After 60 seconds, the skeletons will despawn and their strength buff will reset. However, if the fireballs, ground fire, or Nefarian's breath hit the skeletons before they despawn, their despawn timer will reset to 0 and they will retain their increased power. If the ad tank is unable to keep the skeletons out of the fire and despawn them, they will eventually become too powerful to tank and will overrun the entire raid. Thus, the ad tank will have to continuously move the ads around the room. And don't worry, the ground fire will eventually despawn as well. Apparently, some Nefarian strategy videos have implied you should kite the ads in phase 3. That is entirely untrue. You simply tank the ads, moving around the room and keeping them out of the fire. Some also recommend using Nefarian's fire breath to spawn all the ads at once at the beginning of phase 3, but we did not find that necessary. One healer should simply follow around the ad tank. Holy Paladins are excellent for this role. Meanwhile, the rest of the raid will kill Nefarian. Simply position to one side of the dragon, stack up, and kick his ass. The tank will slowly rotate Nefarian to keep the breaths pointed away from the ad tank, so the rest of the raid needs to rotate along with the tank to avoid eating tail lashes or breath attacks. The ground fire will occasionally spread near the main raid force. Be smart and stay out of the fire. If you need to move the raid from one side of the dragon to the other, call for it, but be sure not to move as a breath is coming, because it can take out a raid member as they pass underneath the boss. If you play correctly, the raid should take no damage other than the crackles. This lets your healers focus their efforts on keeping the tanks alive. Tanks need to play intelligently regarding cooldown usage. For the Nefarian tank, a breath and a crackle occurring at the same time can kill you very quickly. Thus, the Nefarian tank should time their cooldowns appropriately. When Nefarian passes through a 10% damage threshold, he performs his crackle about 8 seconds later. As a main tank, use this knowledge to time your cooldowns to eat a breath as well as the crackle. As phase 3 continues, Nefarian will throw out fireballs at an increased rate, requiring the ad tank to move constantly and forcing the Nefarian tank to rotate the boss more quickly. The raid needs to be aware of this and move accordingly. Since the skeletons lose all threat when they despawn, a respawn skeleton will sometimes beeline for the healers in the middle. If this occurs, have a taunting class grab the mob and bring it over for the ad tank to tag. All in all, once you master the final phase, it is easily repeatable. If you are having difficulties with the latter parts of this fight, we strongly recommend skipping phase 1 by killing Onyxia as quickly as possible. Focus your efforts on surviving through phase 2 and working on positioning in phase 3 before you go for an actual kill. And if you have any questions, you can visit us at twcgaming.org. Thanks, good luck.